want you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath. In, then out.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm very excited to talk about this episode, Doom Patrol Patrol, episode 6.
Doom Patrol Patrol.
Doom Patrol Patrol of Doom Patrol Season 1. Before we get started with that, though, as always, you and I have a little bit to talk about, things that you've had going on in your life.
I've had a few of those chocolate-covered coffee beans, those little cocoa beans.
So this is going to be a great episode.
No, I feel fine now, but you know how you start eating them and you forget that it's caffeine?
I mean, I haven't had one in years because I gave up caffeine years ago.
Right.
So
anyway, fair warning. So the third issue of The Kill Lock is out. This is an original comic by Livio Ramondelli. I provided some consultation in the very early stages as he was developing the story and the characters. Now the third issue is out and folks can pick that up. I have some profiles in the next few issues that essentially deconstruct and reconstruct the psychology of the characters. These are essentially robots, but they have all of the inner workings of our psychology. So, if folks are interested in how they get out of their incredibly devastating situation of being locked together in this system, check it out.
You're not going to find that out in issue number 3, but you are going to
definitely find out by the end. It's 6 issues. It's a contained story. These characters, it's kind of cool as the story unfolds, you learn about their histories and their kind of original, the reasons they end up in the Kill Lock. Mm-hmm. And so it's an imaginative story. It's really interesting. So yeah,
I love the series to death. And in addition to your psychological profiles on the characters, you and I are going to talk to Livio Ramondelli, the writer and illustrator. He's of course been on an episode of the Arkham Sessions in the past when we talked about Over the Edge. And we're going to talk to him about his comic, why he decided to write it, why he decided he needed consultation, because he's very into making sure the psychology of these characters were right. And we're going to talk to him about all that stuff, and you'll be able to find that interview on our Patreon.
So you'll get into the dark recesses of Livio's mind to better understand how he came up with this kind of story.
He doesn't know that yet. But,
right.
But yeah, that's exactly what we're going for. In addition to that, Drea, you also did a couple more things for Fandom.
Yeah, so Fandom has this cool series. They're calling them the IRL series, and they're talking to legal consultants, lawyers, psychologists, folks like me, to better explain and understand characters that are fictional. So I had the pleasure to talk, of course, about Harley Quinn. The video is up now on YouTube. It's called Is Harley Quinn Crazy? And it's found on Fandom IRL, their new channel. As a side note, the word crazy is in the title of their video, but really early on in the explanation, we talk about that concept as more of a word or term that denotes someone who's unpredictable and kind of reckless, wild, out of control, which Harley is. She's definitely those things. But one thing that I really wanted to make clear was that the word should really never ever be used to characterize someone with a mental health disorder.
Yeah.
And it's a fun educational video. It's got some clips that are entertaining, and there's actually going to be a series. So I think 2 or 3 videos will be available. Maybe by the time this podcast officially airs, there'll be at least 2 out there.
And you'll be able to find that over at Fandom, or you've tweeted them out. I've tweeted them out. The Arkham Sessions has tweeted them out. You can also find it on our Facebook page.
Yeah, and the YouTube channel is Fandom Entertainment.
Excellent. That sounds awesome. Also, this week, Matt Reeves revealed the costume for the new Batman.
This isn't really a full reveal, though. It's definitely...
I wouldn't know, because I was holding back to...
Have you not seen it?
I was holding back in order to react to it. Now that we've got this Patreon video, I'm trying to give the people what they want and react. Turns out you've already seen it, but I don't know how well you saw it. So we might still have to sit down and watch it together. What did you think of it, though?
I think of it, instead of a reveal, I understand what that means, but I think of it more as like a teaser.
It was like camera tests, I think. So at least that's what I was told.
You don't really see the full cowl. You see some of the... You definitely see some of the suit. What is talked about the most, I think, is the bat symbol on the suit, which appears to be actual...
Hold on a second. I still haven't seen it, so
Okay.
so don't go spoiling
We
anything.
definitely need to talk about that, because what people are assuming it is one of the most psychologically riveting concepts for
just the bat symbol
suit.
Just like the
I'm
bat
not
symbol
gonna say
is like
anything.
psychologically riveting.
I'm really not going to say anything else.
Okay. All right. Well, here's another tease. Go join Patreon so that you can find out what we think of the new bat suit.
It's made out of blood. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm very interested. I did see someone posted an image of something. I couldn't actually see what it was, but it was like a very red... There's like a very red filter or background or something.
That's why it's kind of hard to see the suit, because it's not clear. It's kind of...
The thumbnail I saw was like just a few pixels by just a few pixels. So I didn't actually see any detail of whatever the picture was. I was like, oh, that's a very red thing. And so I'm excited to check it out. Trey, let's talk about episode 6, Doom Patrol, Doom Patrol. Mm-hmm. By the way, episode 6.
I was just going to say, we definitely are going to finish this season in the near future, and we'll definitely be talking about what show we'll be covering next within the potentially the Batman related universe, maybe not.
Yeah.
So it's going to be exciting.
Well, and you know, folks over at Patreon can vote on what we do next. That's one of the tiers. So, but it did occur to me that like we, as of now, are officially more than a third through the first season of Doom Patrol. So I'm excited about this. And I think it's interesting that I'm not the psychologist, so I've never known firsthand what it means to have a breakthrough with, you know, psychologically speaking. I'm wondering if you felt the way I did about this episode, where there was something of a breakthrough with many characters. What did you think?
I've had breakthroughs.
Yeah.
I had one today.
Did you?
I did.
It's nothing you can talk about, I'm sure. But
well, and I don't mean to...
Oh, well, way to brag about
humble
having
brag.
breakthroughs.
I don't mean to minimize what a breakthrough experience is. And I'm not saying I'm that good, but you know what I mean? Like it's not because...
But you did have one as recently as today. Yeah.
And I think I had one yesterday.
Oh my God. So it's a daily experience for you. Jeez.
One a day.
All right.
We'll talk about what that is, and how I define a breakthrough.
Yeah.
And I imagine once we get there, you'll realize you might have more breakthroughs than you think.
I'm not suggesting, I'm saying from a professional psychological perspective, I have no definition for what a breakthrough is. I'm not saying that I've not in my life had breakthroughs and epiphany moments, but this episode in particular had several characters have a moment of self realization or self. There was a light switch that
Like a
seemed
clarity.
to turn on, and now they are on a completely different path than they had been before. Specifically, I'm thinking Rita
Yeah.
more maybe than anyone else. I mean, we had talked about how over the last couple of episodes, she had been leaning more towards embracing the heroic side. Maybe at first a little hesitantly, but once she connected with Elliot, the boy, the book, then lost him, that seemed to push her deeper down this hole of there's a little bit of despair there, but at the same time she opened up empathetically. I thought she has become one of the most empathetic characters in the show, constantly connecting with whom she's speaking in every scene.
She's moved past the unfeeling, or at least the guise of an unfeeling, uncaring, detached person, and is clearly making emotional and personal connections, ones that are meaningful to her. And I think it's also tied in with what's occurring in the story, which we should definitely jump into. There was a very there was a lot of mimicry of X-Men's academy.
Right.
So I wanted to know what you thought about that as well.
Well, okay, so they're still looking for Niles Calder. Once again, he had been sort of sucked away by Mr. Nobody. That ended up blowing the arm off of Vic, and Vic was desperate for Cliff not to engage the sort of self rehabilitative mode, that would regrow the cybernetic arm, because it basically shuts down his ability to do anything, giving all control to his father remotely. Now Vic cannot reactivate his cannon arm. He can't really do anything super heroic without the permission of his father, who has come to the house to oversee the development of the arm and to make sure everything is going well. And presumably this is the first time that this has ever happened, because he seems very impressed by the speed at which the arm has regrown itself and the connections that have been made there. And this is an opportunity for Vic to reconnect with his father in a way. He has to turn over a little bit of trust, because there's a moment where he is told that his father is going to shut him down. I mean,
Right.
He's essentially going to, like any robot, like C-3PO, he's just going to shut his son down for like 3 hours.
It's meant to be a restorative process that he's doing.
Rebooting.
Yeah, he's doing that to restore him. It's almost like putting somebody in a medically induced coma.
Yeah, he does say it's going to be like a nap.
Yeah, in order for, and this happens to slow down some of the reactions or responses the body has to physiological trauma. So it makes a lot of sense. The analog makes a lot of sense, but I do agree. It is complete. It's a complete takeover of his system. There's a loss of control for Vic, and he tells Robot Man, keep an eye on what happens to me when I'm in this coma, when I'm shut down.
Yeah, he kind of doesn't trust his father and what his father may or may not do while he is in this coma. Mm-hmm. Remember that, because there is a big moment that happens at the end of this episode that we will address that sort of counters this. It's another one of those epiphany breakthrough moments, if you will. Let's talk about Cliff. because once again, I feel like Cliff is given short riff in this episode. I think that Cliff, I'm not sure they quite know what to do with him. Every episode, he seems to be paired off with only one other person in a B plot. He doesn't really ever seem to be, I mean, in Puppet Patrol, he was there, but even in Puppet Patrol, he was off on his own, not really engaged in the main story and investigative stuff that was happening. So once again, he has been paired with just one other person while everyone else is off doing something else. And in this case, he is paired off with Cyborg. He is there monitoring as Vic is being worked on by his father.
It seems as though he's off in the B story. Like there's a definite A story here that we'll jump into, but this sort of low-key one-on-one conversations between Cyborg and Robot Man. I mean, there's a clear, obvious connection there. They are these synthetic cybernetic beings, and they're both dealing with navigating their own systems and interacting with the world in certain ways. I think there's a clear, obvious connection with how they might relate to one another.
Now, what's interesting about Cliff is he seems to be the key to unlocking a lot of moments, a lot of sort of hypocritical moments, especially. For instance, when you're talking about Crazy Jane went off on him and said that the way that he reacted to the minions in Puppet Patrol was one of the reasons she can't ever trust him or love him or look up to him, because it was devastating. Watching the bloodshed that he induced during that episode was devastating to their relationship. And it's why she can't really see him as the father figure that he is sort of seeking. Meanwhile, in the very next episode, we start out with a moment where Crazy Jane is destroying people in a punk setting. So it's not the violence that he is showing her that is so upsetting. It's possibly just how close it is to her own propensity for violence that is so upsetting to Crazy Jane. Interestingly, he is also the mechanism by which Vic realizes that, that he has his epiphany, because Cliff, in a moment of wanting to connect to his daughter, his real daughter, the one that he believes is alive somewhere out there, he basically Facebooks her. He looks her up and realizes he can't see her profile without being her friend, and asks Vic to do his thing.
How do I see my kid's face whole?
Create a profile, send her a friend request, and wait for her not to accept it.
I was thinking you could stick a cyber finger in it, jiggle handle, and unlock it for me.
First of all, none of what you just said makes sense. And if you're asking me to hack into it for you, no.
This goes completely against every principle that Vic currently has, because he is very anti the monitoring of his own father. He is very anti the lack of privacy. And so helping Cliff does not compute with Vic. And so at the end of this episode, after a moment of breakthrough where Cliff's father says that where Vic's father says that he will relinquish all control and he will enable privacy mode to his son, genuinely giving him what he has always desired, that is when Vic decides to give access to the Facebook profile of his daughter to Cliff. So Cliff seems to be the key to unlocking certain emotional hypocrisies and maybe,
Well, I also wonder if his purpose in the story is to introduce flexibility of thinking, that we're in often with this show, there are these binary ideas, black and white. You should never use violence. Once you use violence, you're a monster. And you're pointing out, now, well, there are times when we do resort to violence, when people attack our character. Now, remember when Crazy Jane lashes out in that punk bar at that show.
Yeah.
It's right after somebody yells a hateful, derogatory term toward her.
Yeah.
And so it's her response to that racism, that's her threshold. And so I think, and you're right, then she turns around, and when she sees Robot Man be deadly, essentially murder these Nazis, her reaction is to target him with her hatred.
Yeah.
So it's a displacement. I think you're right. I think there's this kind of difficulty dealing with these strong emotions, but he often comes in to give us some flexible thinking to understand, like, when do we go against our typical rigid black and white thinking? When do we have to think in a more dynamic, flexible way?
Right.
Yeah, so let's get into the academy.
The A plot. Yeah, now that we've covered B plot, that is all except for the big reveal that Cliff sees in the Facebook page, which we can cover later. But the A plot is that the gang has gone off on a quest to find what Mr. Nobody refers to as the Doom Patrol. Obviously, they are not calling themselves this at this time. We're only 6 episodes into their origin story. And so at the end of the final episode that we saw, Mr. Nobody whispers into her ear, "Find the Doom Patrol." So now Crazy Jane is off on this mission to find the Doom Patrol. And it takes them to this academy for basically mutants. It's like Xavier's. It's Xavier's School for the Gifted.
Very close to the X-Men.
Where you have metahumans, adult metahumans teaching children, uniformed children.
And they have all these different abilities and superpowers. And I wonder how much of that, and again, I didn't read this comic, so I wonder how much of that is really tapping into some original story, or how much of this is meant to be a wink toward us. Like, you're all familiar with X-Men. Let's give you what that looks like. And because toward the end of the episode, it really kind of punches you in the face with it. Like, there's this very upsetting reality to it. But our first exposure to it is these professors and instructors. There's a headmaster. Well, I guess Niles is the headmaster. This young gentleman who greets Jane he's sort of is the person who oversees everything.
He's the administrator.
Yeah, he's the person who.
And we're talking about Joshua Clay.
Yeah, he's in the comics though, right?
He is in the comics. Joshua Clay was better known as Tempest in the comics. He alludes in the episode to having meta abilities later on. He sort of it's sort of suggested that he doesn't throughout the episode, and then later he reveals to the gang that he does in fact have powers. We did not get to see what those powers were, so I'm going to hold off on that because I'm curious to see if we see him again and whether that's brought up. But yeah, he was initially brought into the Doom Patrol by Celsius, who we also see in the group. She's the one who shoots freezing cold onto Crazy Jane's mouth to shut her up. Celsius, of course, is Arani Desai, also known as Arani Calder. She is the wife of Niles Calder in the comics. Maybe. We're not sure if she is, supposedly there was a secret wedding, And then when Niles disappeared and supposedly died with the rest of the Doom Patrol at one point, she went off in search of him and then started a new group called the New Doom Patrol, where she recruited, very much like Charles Xavier or even Niles, she recruited Joshua Clay. She recruited Rhea Jones, who we also got to see as Lodestone, although she didn't really play a huge part in this particular episode.
And I was curious because we're introduced to them when they're appearing to be young, like, you know, I wouldn't say like folks in their 30s. The era is unclear, but it feels like you time travel, like you're in a flashback, but at the same time, our main characters, our proxy, they're the same.
Yeah.
And they haven't acknowledged any kind of time travel. So it's
Right.
as if they're going to the exact time and place where Niles was running this academy.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this academy existed in the comics and wasn't.
The academy didn't exist.
Okay.
At least not that I remember. I could be entirely wrong. But somewhere there was a period of time in the mid 60s to early 70s, where mid 60s ish, I think, where this new Doom Patrol existed. And you had Mento. You had Steve Dayton. And what I think is brilliant about what they're doing in this show is they are taking what is essentially the original Doom Patrol and introducing them to the new Doom Patrol as the original Doom Patrol. So they're flipping it. And you are seeing these characters who presumably in the 60s sometime fought against Mr. Nobody, lost, believed that they won through Mento's use of his helmet. He has created this world around them in which they defeated Mr. Nobody. And they are just living this lie. That is not so dissimilar to what actually happened in the comics. There was a period of time where members of the new Doom Patrol failed. They were killed, not by Mr. Nobody, but by another character. And it drove Mento, well, I don't want to use the term insane, but in the comics, he was insane. And he became addicted to the use of his helmet. And it was really pretty tragic. It is very similar to the story they are actually telling in this. Now, I don't remember them creating a bubble universe for themselves where there's an academy where they're teaching school children and all of that. That seems to be something that Niles put in place in order to give a healthy life to these broken heroes. But I did, like you, find it really interesting how it paralleled Marvel, but maybe showed that it's a broken system.
Yeah, it very early in their interactions, our Doom Patrol characters start to notice a glitch. Like there's it's almost like the Matrix. Like there's a clear, brief moment where the system breaks down and you see it's dark and gray and transparent, and then it lights back up again. You can see the fabric of the illusion just momentarily, and it was very haunting, like, because I didn't know what the premise of this academy was. I was like, oh, it's just like X-Men, cool. And then it started to deteriorate, and as with many of these episodes, our main characters are haunted by their personal traumas. And those things begin to permeate their experience. And in this academy, one thing that seemed connected, at least something we could connect to or we could understand, was that Rita and Mento have this history.
Yes.
So apparently, and she's the only one who knows anybody. She said, actually, I think she said Mento was the only person she actually met.
Correct.
And they had a romantic relationship, but she's very I guess secretive. She's kind of withholding. She doesn't share what went down. She just said they dated. And then
briefly, even she just sort of it was a brief affair with Steve Dayton.
So let's talk about Mento's power, because this brought up for me a bunch of ideas around psychic healing and pseudoscience. Like, I get that he truly has this superpower, but it raised a lot of issues for me.
So not just using his real meta power for therapy, but the idea of, in our world, people using pseudoscience like psychic healing.
Intuitive healer, psychic healing, energy, psychology.
Right.
I definitely want to delve into how this manifests in our world, as you said, in some positive ways, but also in some ways that we should caution ourselves around.
Okay.
And I think, Mento means well. Like, that's kind of what's interesting about him.
In the beginning, anyway.
Yeah. So how we're introduced to him is that Niles, this is a flashback where Niles tells Rita, this is after Rita fully begins to understand that she has to gain control of her body. There's a really disturbing memory that we see of her where she's going to, I don't know, is he a director, a casting agent?
He appears to be a producer. He's Harvey Weinstein. He is a mega producer who is putting together a film. The director and casting want to cast another girl, but suggests that if she sit on his lap and do some hanky panky, she could get the part. It would be her first starring role in a long time, sort of her comeback. And she loses control over her form and smothers him as the Blob.
Yeah. And he dies.
Straight up dies.
It's sort of...
and the assistant who knows that this is his thing
she covers for her.
Yeah.
I think it's... the beginning of this scene is a little, I would say there's a lot of tension because we're seeing her realize that she has to perform for him in many ways, right? And that ultimately his death is kind of rewarding. There's a sense of he got what he deserved. And meanwhile, this is a turning point for her.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe breakthrough, but I would say a turning point in the sense that she realizes how dangerous she could be, that this is not something that she wanted to do, but found her loss of her body, her loss of control of her body could lead to something like that. So she goes to Niles, and he recruits Mento to provide her some kind of therapy. This is going to be this unique, innovative psychotherapy involving his psychic power. And it's an interesting moment that I could relate to a lot. It's, he and her, they talk about consent, essentially. He says, I'm going to enter your mind. Like, I'm going to put on this helmet and I'll have access to your thoughts and feelings, your memories. I will be examining your brain, your mind from the inside. And she expresses a sense of, an honest sense of fear around that. What are you going to see? Are you going to judge me? I won't have control over this. And I think there's a really helpful moment for us around trusting someone with your mind, which I think is kind of, as a psychologist, I think that's an endearing moment at first. I mean, it doesn't go well for her later, but at first it's a sense of consent to therapy, consent to counseling, potentially even representative of consent for other things. And I appreciated that moment where he essentially lets her know, you have control of this. You can stop at any time. You can really be the one who determines how this goes.
Yeah.
That's your game. You read minds.
I have a few other tricks up my sleeve, but yes, I can read minds.
Sorry to have wasted your time, Mr. Dayton, but I don't care to have some stranger gawking at my private thoughts.
As tempting as that might be, I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not gawk at anything of yours without permission. Starting now.
His power is really fascinating too, because he just puts on the helmet and apparently can get into someone's mind.
Yeah, really what it is he can do it anyway, but the helmet helps him focus it, helps him enhance the power. It basically acts as a conduit, similar to Xavier's use of Cerebro.
Or Magneto's use of his helmet.
Well, his helmet prevents Xavier from getting into his mind, but yes, it's another case where a helmet is in some way amplifying.
Look, this is not an X-Men show.
That is true. That is true. But then we find out later that what he's doing isn't quite as
ethical?
Yeah. Talk about that.
Well, I guess that's what my question was for you. He seemed genuine in his initial approach with Rita.
Yeah.
That seemed like they wanted to build trust. What makes it very confusing is that they start to date.
Yeah.
And should you really, in this world, in the Doom Patrol world, the psychic reader, the man with the psychic power, dates the woman with these psychological and physiological vulnerabilities, working through, yet to overcome her situation. I think that power exchange, even if it's agreed upon, it is not it's not healthy. I don't think it's right. I think that he has too much power in that dynamic. Now, obviously,
and she's giving him a lot of that power, because even in a moment where they're going to be intimate, she asks him to put on the helmet because she has had some traumas, and so she is.
Well, she doesn't want to kill him.
Yeah, she doesn't want to lose control, so she's asking him to basically help her maintain control, which is a really scary dynamic, because here you've got someone who's essentially a patient asking you for help. But now you're like, I guess this is why therapists aren't allowed to.
Well, it's illegal.
Yes.
So
he's got a lot of control that, yes, she is giving him, but he just shouldn't have at this point. It's sort of scary.
I don't know. I sort of feel, you say that she gives him that power. I think he is persuading her. I think that because of the pre-existing power dynamic, she feels empowered to make those decisions, but I think he's already in a power exchange with her.
Yeah, I guess.
So
I guess in that
kind
moment,
of influenced.
Yeah, I think I thought of it in that moment as it was still pretty fresh. It may have been even the first time the two of them had ever been intimate. Therefore, it was pretty early on in the relationship. Interestingly, in the comics, they ended up getting married, and it didn't end well. Eventually, it got to a point where it was revealed that he had been manipulating her emotions for a long time. And so really this version of the character isn't so far off from the actual version of the character. You know what's really funny is in the comics, they ended up adopting Gar.
Gar? Who Gar?
Beast Boy. They ended up adopting and raising Beast Boy from Teen Titans. So they were, they were mom and dad to young Gar.
Okay.
Yeah, it was weird.
Well, So as things get weird, and I'm not sure I fully understand what happened, to be quite honest.
Yeah. He did. Well, we've got a little bit of audio here. We should play it. This is after the two of them, she wakes up in bed and he is getting dressed and bolting out the door. He seems to be very unhappy. Let's take a listen.
What's wrong?
How could you?
What are you talking about?
Mary Beth? That poor girl.
You read my mind. Without my permission.
Don't you dare judge me. Not after what you've done. I'm just sorry I didn't do it sooner.
So earlier we saw that there is a memory that she has of a blonde woman slitting her wrists. And there is a strong indication that Rita may or may not have had something to do with that. Now, I'm not suggesting that Rita convinced her to slit her wrists, but she ended up, suiciding as a result of what ended up happening or something. I don't know, but there's something very clearly she was a witness to the suicide, but it wasn't simply that she was a witness. She had there was a deeper connection there, because as we hear in this audio, he is judging her based on what she did or didn't do to this woman.
Well, and this is the exact thing he promised not to do.
Yeah.
A promise is a prison. I will never forget what Star Trek has taught me.
Right.
Or what Picard has taught me. He had very early on, before they started the therapeutic relationship, had said, I will never judge you for what I see in there. I will never blame you or judge you for what I encounter in your mind, which is a very comforting idea. This is what relationships are based on, Brian. This concept that as you get closer, as we continue to watch Blind Date on Netflix.
It's called Love is Blind.
Love is Blind. As people get further and further into the depths of intimate, romantic, very, very closely connected relationships, that eventually you're going to learn things about each other that you may not like, you may not agree with. It may surprise you. It may shock you. It may disturb or even disgust you.
Yeah.
So how deep is that love? I think that's what the show we're watching, the other show. That's what the Netflix show Love is Blind is about.
I guess.
But I think what I'm saying is that early on he had promised to Rita, I'm going to build this trust with you. I want you to trust me. And so therefore, I won't get into any judgment about what's in your mind.
And furthermore, he promises that not only will I not judge you for it, I won't prod into things you don't want me to prod into. I will get your permission. Right. I will get your consent.
That's the consent
and at the end of this clip that we just heard, obviously, she's like, I can't believe you did this. And he's like, I can't believe I didn't do it sooner. He's kicking himself for getting intimately involved with a woman that he is now judging as a horrible human being for something she did, presumably to this woman.
Do you think that he's in the wrong here?
Yes.
You do? Okay. I think that this is why I wonder maybe initially he had good intentions, but just could never predict that he might encounter something that he didn't agree with.
Yeah. I think like all people in relationships, or most people in relationships, feelings and jealousy and curiosity get the better of you. You might read someone's diary, or you might look at someone's emails or their text messages. This guy went into her head. And I think, I'm not suggesting that everyone does that. I'm saying, but a lot of people have the thought, they have the urge to do these things.
It's a representation of some of the things we might do with one another to betray trust in these relationships. So that I guess is the turning point for him, or that's where he decides where they stand. I mean, I sort of feel like in the show, this is where he becomes the villain.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. 100%. This is where he becomes the villain. And interestingly, this facade around the school has been intact for decades. And he's basically been in a living coma, projecting this image around everyone else for years and years and years, and hasn't made a peep until Rita comes to the building. So the moment Rita is reintroduced, that's when he activates, and it's when he starts showing her horrible past, these nightmarish images of this woman suiciding in front of her. By the way, he was doing that in a room where he was showing off. People should, especially if you're a hardcore DC fan, you should go to that scene and pause and take a look at some of the artifacts in that room, because there's some pretty deep dives into some DC lore that I won't bore people with here. But he shows her the girl suiciding. He shows Larry.
Captain Trainer, you and I know there is no getting out. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Are you and your partner ready to continue our mission?
This isn't happening.
That's some Scarecrow-esque right there.
Yeah. And he also, he shows Jane puzzle pieces, a flood, a Shining-esque, replace the blood going down the hallways and out of the elevator with puzzle pieces, and you see her nightmare. This is interesting because this leads to a potential origin story for how she got her shattered personalities. So they've been playing with different options, because in the comics, a lot of that has to do with abuse, an abuse of they're at home, but also the priest in the church, which we have seen. And here they are alluding to a moment in the Grant Morrison run where we learn that the abuse at the hands of her father happened while she was putting together puzzles. And so when you see the hand come up out of the puzzle pieces.
I just about ran out of the room.
And talking about, come over here, baby, all of it is definitely alluding to the moment that everything fractured for her.
This male figure reaching out to her to abuse her.
Yeah. It's bad enough that Mr. Nobody, who seems to be sort of omniscient, just knows all these people's backstories. But for a man with a helmet, a psionic helmet, to be prodding into your brain, looking for those things that are going to be your downfall, your ultimate nightmare, it makes him probably even more sinister than Mr. Nobody.
All the more reason in a comparison to a healing person, whether it's a counselor, therapist, psychologist. That really speaks to the amount of power psychologically that we want to be careful around, and that we want to respect. We want to treat people with honor and dignity. And you will learn things about people, and you should never weaponize the vulnerabilities that they have. Yeah. And this is what this particular healer is doing in a very menacing way. It's interesting because he's almost catatonic in his wheelchair, being an octogenarian, like clearly an older gentleman. I'm not saying that someone in that physical state can't be powerful.
Yeah.
I just mean that this is all happening through his psychic abilities, and that their entire physical surrounding is a facade. It's this imagery that he's created. There are no children. There's just the two professors who are also older. It's clear that that past, we were seeing their past, and this is all.
We've got Arani and we've got Rhea there along with Mento. And Arani may or may not have been married to Niles in a scene. Again, it's one of those DC comic fans' dreams when you throw in little bits like this, because she could very well have been married to him. And in her fantasy, in the moment, or in the world that Mento is creating for her, Niles is her husband, and he is wheeling in and reading the paper, and he is there with her, and and it's not until he disappears again that she gets really angry, and then that's when we see her as the old woman. And then we didn't really get to see what Rhea's deal was, but
no, there was an interesting suggestion of violence or history of violence with the suspended knives.
Yeah.
So clearly there was something potentially traumatizing, but all of this kind of exists. Like, not that these characters aren't interesting; they're fascinating, but this entire story existed to give us more understanding of our main characters' histories and traumatic pasts. And I feel like each episode, this is yet another clever way to help us gather or help us connect more to their trauma.
Yeah.
It's I think it's really it's very creative. It's a fascinating way to do that. Something that I definitely want to talk about more is Mento's therapy. Like, he, at one point when he's treating Rita, he teaches her this self-directed calming mantra.
Oh yeah.
I think you have an audio of this.
I do. You want to hear it?
Yes.
I was a belly dancer, an SOE spy, the queen of Muscle Beach. I used to be Rita Farr, star of stage and screen. Now I don't know who I am.
A blank slate is the perfect place for you to start to rebuild yourself. You just have to decide who it is you want to be.
Same person I've always been. Rita Farr.
Let's begin. I want you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath. In, then out. In, then out. Now open them.
What's happening? Mento?
It's all right. You're perfectly safe.
Where am I?
You are nowhere. All that exists are you and your breath. Breathe in, then out. Good. Now, repeat after me. The person who is breathing is me.
The person who is breathing is me.
Again.
The person who is breathing is me. 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 The person who is breathing is me.
This nonsense actually works.
Oh, good to know you were keeping an open mind.
And this is why I picked up on this. I wondered, it's almost like a mindfulness technique. It's almost
I thought about you when he did it. I thought about that episode that you did where you were being mindful, and this might be what people think of when they when they say they get put to sleep by your NPR-esque mindfulness voice,
It's just that.
It's this guy.
It could be. And I promise I'm not abusing my mento powers when I do it.
Right.
But it really kind of, I had a breakthrough. No, I didn't have a breakthrough, but I had a moment of realizing that is really the active ingredient, so to speak. The mindfulness technique he uses, giving her the, empowering her with this ability to calm the body and the brain through some focused, meditative, self-directed techniques. That's kind of the core of what mindfulness is. It's our ability to focus on the here and now, to kind of do our best effortfully to keep from getting too distracted by everything we're dealing with and just focus on one aspect of our being, just being present in the moment. And even accepting what that feels like, what our bodies feel like, what our minds are doing, what comes up for us in this non-judgmental, introspective way.
Yeah.
He, however, claims that it's his psychic ability that heals her. And this is why I thought about some of the forms of counseling interventions, or even these theories around some alternative medicine techniques that kind of are umbrellaed under this term energy medicine or energy psychology. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. First thing I want to say is I'm not a healer that uses energy psychology. And so I have to honestly claim that because I'm not an expert, I can't speak to all aspects of this this umbrella term. But I do think what I can hopefully offer is just kind of curiosity around some of these different techniques and why we should be critical of them, why we should hold some level of not so much suspicion, just curiosity. When I'm not going to go into energy medicine as a broader term, because that deals with focusing on treatments for different medical conditions. So sticking to psychology, what that means is that I really want to bring up the different areas and suggestions around counseling interventions that are addressing people's depression, mood, anxiety, stress, OCD, areas around psychological disorders and psychological conditions. One technique or one idea that comes up a lot is called emotional freedom technique or emotional freedom techniques. And that essentially is a word that it's interchanged with tapping. So I know you've heard of like tapping before.
Sure. Which some people
use this.
They live by it.
Tapping on what's called meridian points on the body, tapping to essentially, this particular therapy is purported to address your energy in your body. And so it really is surrounding the concept of addressing what's called a life force. So some people think there's a life force that flows through your body. And so the tapping is very much related to like acupuncture or acupressure, which is more of, that's certainly not invasive, but more of a different form of this. And some of those philosophies are brought into this concept of tapping, for instance, that there's certain parts of the body you want to tap. The issue is that the existence of a life force is not empirically supported. We can't measure something called a life force. Have you ever tried tapping or acupuncture before?
Never.
You haven't done acupuncture?
Mm-mm.
I thought you did.
Mm-mm.
No?
I know people who have, but I've never done it.
So meridian endpoints, I mentioned the word meridian, that refers to particular points on the body, the top of the head, the eyebrows, under the eyes, lots of places on the face, the chin, then down to the collarbone and around the arms, definitely the back, right? When it comes to tapping techniques, they're repetition. There's kind of a monotonous form to it. And there are claims around like, oh, there's a particular mechanism that as you tap those certain points that you access this life energy. So energy psychology, as I said, it's an umbrella. So there are other types of healing modalities. Some people call it contact healing. Some call it distant healing. Reiki is one of these well-recognized forms of using this life force or using
sound or something. It was always weird. I actually had an ex-girlfriend whose mother was a Reiki practitioner.
Okay. What did that look like?
Don't know.
Oh,
no. It was offered. That's weird. I just didn't. I mean, not necessarily Reiki, although that could be weird too. But when your girlfriend's mom is like, "Get on the table, I'll heal you," you're like, "Nah, this is a trap." So no, I was not into it. But I thought there was sound or something involved, or like waves of something. Or at least that's how it's sort of described.
Well, and I know people can't see me, but there's a movement with the healer's hands.
Yeah.
And really, I think it's accessing and manipulating in a positive way the life force around, surrounding the body.
Yeah.
And so that's why I said sometimes this is contact healing because there's touching, and sometimes it's not. There's no touching of the body, but there's the ability, you might have even heard the word intuitive healer.
Yes.
There's the ability of a person.
Very recently, actually.
Yeah, of course. So here's the interesting thing is that there are some folks that receive these types of therapies and experience improvement. And I don't want to discount those experiences. Certainly, there's much more going on in these different healing interactions. And so I'm the type of skeptic that would say, what are these other interactions and processes? What are the mechanisms? I mentioned before, what is the active ingredient? With Mento, I think the active ingredient was a mindfulness technique. It wasn't his so-called, now this is that's certainly a science fiction characteristic from that story. He did have the ability to go into someone's mind in a psychic way, right?
Yes.
But what I think I'm trying to pull from that is that wasn't the active ingredient so much as it was this less interesting, less sexy, less amazing intervention, which was the mindfulness piece. And when you look at certain techniques, especially tapping, the therapist often uses a really helpful cognitive or other interactional strategies to address the person's mental health concerns. So if it's anxiety, for instance, they might be working through some of those anxious thoughts and feelings. There might even be some exposure or imaginal therapy happening where, or imaginal exposure happening where imagery is used or ideas are used to help a person encounter their anxiety or fears. I think that's kind of when this works really well. I think that's when people might have their so-called breakthroughs or their self-betterment. The reality, and I've looked at this recently because I know that these types of interventions are growing. Gwyneth Paltrow and her Goop,
quackery.
I was going to say her company, have been identified as introducing some of these alternative healing modalities that I've been concerned about because it brings in some methods that are clearly not founded in science. So something like crystal healing, for instance. I know you've heard of this before, right?
Yep.
Crystals are, they're essentially, you have to get the right kind of crystals. They're particular minerals, I think it's usually quartz, that are believed by some people to have health properties.
And they have to be charged. They have to be properly charged, and they have to be. I have an old high school friend.
Oh boy.
Whose business is like she owns a shop where you can buy these crystals and you can get them online, like big like giant things that right there for healing properties.
It's an interesting thing. Time magazine just had an article about this, and they explained that the idea is that you hold the crystal or you place the crystal on your body or close to your body to promote physical, emotional, and spiritual healing. And so again, this concept that this crystal is interacting with your body's energy field, or what's called chakra. So while some crystals are said to alleviate stress, you can get, this is what your friend's business is, you can get other crystals to help with concentration, focus, creativity, help you memorize things, help you sleep better, etc. There are some studies that take a deeper look into the effectiveness of these strategies. And while you can find some articles out there that do demonstrate the effectiveness of some of these strategies, there is far more evidence that these types of strategies that fall under this energy psychology umbrella are more closer to a placebo effect, that there's likely another active ingredient that can be responsible for any kind of psychological change. When I recently was looking into this Time article, they explained this concept of it being in the eye of the beholder. And I think that's kind of powerful. I'm the kind of person that believes if it truly works for you and it's accessible and it's affordable and it brings you joy, I'm not going to come in and slap that crystal out of your hand.
Yeah.
That's definitely not something I would do. But there was an interesting study where a number of people were using this intervention, and they were told to hold a quartz crystal, one that was supposedly a real healing one, or a counterfeit crystal, one just made of glass. And then the participants were asked questions about how they felt before and after they held the crystals. They felt that, this is the interesting part, the participants felt that both the real and the fake crystals produced the similar sensations, this like belief that that they could feel these like tingling vibrations, this healing sense, and that would account for the changes they experienced psychically or psychologically. But what they found, though, is that this is really the placebo effect. If people believe a treatment will make them feel better, many of them do authentically actually feel better.
Right.
And that's when I would step in to say, it's important to know what's therapeutically effective and what's essentially worthless. But it's also important to honor people's real experiences with some of these different modalities. I just think more research is needed to just back up some of the claims around some of these different approaches. And like always, we should just be very mindful of how we recommend different treatments, how we talk about certain treatments. And again, as I said at the very beginning of this part of the show, I'm not an expert. I'm not a healing expert in these modalities. So
yeah.
I'm probably not the best person to make that recommendation if someone were to come to me and say, they want this tapping method or they want a particular healing modality that I don't have expertise in.
Right.
I'm likely to refer them to some education, but also refer them to the person or the people that might actually, have experience in or certification in some of those modalities. I guess in going back to Mento, what I feel about Mento is kind of, there's some dissonance. This person clearly he re-traumatized Rita with his betrayal of trust. And yet he taught her a technique that she still uses. And it's interesting. I think that she somehow had the ability to hold on to the true healing nature of their relationship. Now there's still a lot that she has to overcome, but I think that's the real challenge for patients. Can they can they access the components that really are helping them with their self-betterment, with their some of their psychological symptoms, and certainly their own growth and healing.
Right.
It is certainly, there's much more responsibility from the perspective of the therapist to do what's right and responsible and to do what's effective. This is a service typically that people pay for or use their insurance for or have a copay. So, with going back to Mento, the exchange was much more, it was morally and ethically compromised. Their exchange was around a romantic relationship.
Right.
And he really took advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Horrible. One person I want to talk about a little bit, and it's funny because we hardly ever see him, is Niles. Niles Calder. The more and more we learn about him, I'm wondering what you think about him. Now, granted, this is a case where it's a psychologist trying to analyze a character she's not seeing very often, but I would argue that is a...
Wait, who's the psychologist?
You are.
Oh,
I'm asking you. I'm asking you to talk about Niles because this episode in particular was huge in revealing a real flaw in his character, which is that if you are broken, he abandons you. He puts you in this little foster home, and what's interesting is Joshua Clay, when introduced to Jane, knows who she is and has a room ready for her, which is telling us right off the bat that Niles is fully anticipating putting Jane in this home at some point. Like you get to see moments where he is treating her baby doll specifically on a VHS tape. And you get to see that he's being very loving and very attentive. He's very apologetic for needing to go away for a couple of days. She is going to feel abandoned. But ultimately, he acknowledges that she might be too much to control, too much to handle. And he is fully setting up a room for her at this retirement home where presumably she'll think she's a professor or something. And Joshua doesn't want to reveal too much to her during their session together. But
well, is Doom Manor some precursor to this academy?
Well, I think Doom Manor is just where they all... I mean, it is a precursor to some degree. I think it's just where they all currently congregate, where he's trying to create his ultimate super team and where...
Because she's invited into that community.
But she's been there a while.
Right.
And she has been invited into that community, but he has prompted Joshua to get a room ready for her.
Right.
And we see once the facade is down that it's just lined with locks. Like they are fully cognizant of the fact that this is a person you are going to have to keep behind a series of 20 locks in a room.
Right. I'm not ready to say. I just don't know enough about his intentions.
So even after Mr. Nobody, because when you think about it, Mr. Nobody is the one telling Jane to go seek this place out, knowing full well what she's going to find. He is breaking up. He is at least instilling in them this sense that Niles maybe isn't the good guy. Or maybe you shouldn't trust him fully if he can't control you.
Well,
or
after
if
all,
he can't.
he gave Mento permission. He was the one who stewarded in Mento to treat Rita. Mento wasn't a good guy. I think
And we've seen that he's got a dark history with the dark arts and, and all that. But he also is the one we learned that, that when given an opportunity to build Robot Man in a better form, in a less archaic and rusty and Frankenstein form, he chose his old ways. Apparently he talked to Silas about what to do, and Silas was like, I could have made you better than Cyborg. And Niles chose, no, I'm going to create this monstrosity of a being, of a rusty being.
I think we're in the place where we need to be, which is a healthy suspicion of Niles. But I'm not ready to
call him a bad guy yet.
No, I think we're going to learn more.
Okay.
So I'd like to
hold off.
Defer.
Okay.
Deferred.
All right. So you have to have been excited about this episode. Did it bring you back to enjoying the series? I know there were a couple of episodes that got weird there and you weren't entirely sure what to do with them, but did this episode like bring you back to the core?
I enjoyed it much more than the last couple. But it's, again, it's often the side journey or the call to action, some kind of adventure that they go on that then dismantles entirely or creates these confrontations that they have with their pasts. And that's, I'm going to sound incredibly cheesy here, but that's what therapy is about.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a therapy session. This is a nice circling back to this concept of a breakthrough. You mentioned Rita potentially having a breakthrough.
Oh, I think Rita had the biggest breakthrough. In fact, I've got audio here because it was such a touching moment. Let's take a listen.
A long time ago, you taught me I was my own biggest obstacle. That I could decide who I wanted to be. For the last 60 years, I decided that Rita Farr was someone who deserved to be punished. I haven't changed my mind about that. Rita Farr is empty and ugly and small. I don't want to be those things anymore. I don't want to be Rita Farr anymore. Without her, I don't know who I am. All I know is I don't want to end up like you. Or Ronnie or Rhea. And who knows? Maybe if I stop trying to forget the things that haunt me and actually face them, maybe Mr. Nobody won't hold so much power over me. I owe you for that. And I forgive you.
I think you're right. I think this is a psychological breakthrough. But my concept of a breakthrough is any introspective moment that brings clarity, understanding, organization of thoughts and feelings, and a call to action. That's essentially what she brings to light here is, I think I'm finding purpose.
Yeah.
I think I know how I matter in this big story. And I mentioned somewhat jokingly that I experience breakthroughs, and I don't mean for me necessarily. I mean, I'm a witness to breakthroughs. I might be a catalyst to breakthroughs. I think most of the time I'm just an observer and give people a place to find structure and safety in order to experience that eventual breakthrough. And breakthroughs don't have to be life-changing. It can be, a moment of clarity, a realization.
Just that step forward.
Yeah. And I bet this happens for you more than you think.
Sure. I'm sure it does. Every day, in fact. I had it yesterday and today. So
right.
You're not better than me. We should also touch very briefly, because I have a feeling we're going to get more in upcoming episodes, but Larry finally seems to be connecting with that being inside of him. They seem to be, they're understanding one another more, and I'm liking that. I'm very interested to see where that goes. Maybe we'll find out next week. Who knows? Until then, why don't you tell folks where they can find you?
Folks can find me online at on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc, on Instagram, Arkham Asylum Doc. My new website has launched. It's a bit of a soft launch, but you can find it at drdreapsychology.com. There you can find a number of articles I've written, some of my upcoming appearances, some past work, and ways to contact me with questions.
Cool. You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward2028. You cannot find a new website of mine. I don't have one, but we do have Patreon, where you can find us, patreon.com/Arkham Sessions, where you can get early access to this show and all of the Doom Patrol shows going forward. You can vote on what we get to do next. That is a tier. You can get awesome challenge coins. You can get behind the scenes videos. We're about to put some up. You can also get something like a shout out. Yes, we have a tier that gives you a shout out. So let's do that now. Shout outs for the patrons of the month of February include Maria Diego, friend of the show, Wesley Farber, Leslie Brownlee, Jay Griffin Hughes, our good friend Todd Stashwick, amazing actor and a good friend of the show, Ariel Neona, a wonderful actress that I've worked with on several 48-hour films. She was actually our very first patron, and so I'm excited to give her a shout out. And my dad, Carl Ward. He donated to our
Mr.
Patreon.
Carl Ward.
So yeah, we want to thank all of you. Monday, we are putting up our very first episode of Batman Beyond, our reaction and analysis of Batman Beyond. So go join patreon.com/Arkham Sessions to get access to all of that cool stuff. Be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press. There are some great people with some great content, news, comics, podcasts, and more. Go check them out. Till next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.